I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, my hands trembling as I tried to fasten the delicate buttons running down the back of my wedding dress. The ivory silk felt cool against my skin, and for a moment, I caught my reflection staring back at me with eyes that seemed to belong to someone else, someone braver, someone more certain. My mother had helped me into the gown hours earlier, her fingers gentle as she smoothed the fabric over my shoulders, tears already forming in the corners of her eyes. She'd kissed my forehead and whispered that I looked just like she had on her wedding day, and I'd smiled because that's what daughters do. But inside, there was this small voice asking if I was ready for this, if I truly knew the man I was about to marry. Marcus and I had met 3 years earlier at a corporate training seminar in Chicago. I was 28, working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company, living in a studio apartment that barely fit my bed and a tiny kitchen table. He was 31, a financial analyst with an easy smile and a way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the only person who mattered. We'd been paired together for a team-building exercise, something ridiculous involving blindfolds and trust falls, and when he caught me, his arms strong and steady, I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, this was what safety felt like. Our courtship had been whirlwind and romantic in all the ways that movies promise, but real life rarely delivers. Weekend trips to vineyards in Napa, late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, handwritten notes left on my car windshield. He introduced me to his parents within 2 months, a charming couple who lived in a sprawling colonial house in Connecticut and treated me like I was already family. His mother, Patricia, had taken my hands in hers during that first visit and said I was exactly what her son needed, someone grounded and real. His father, Robert, had clapped Marcus on the shoulder and given him a knowing nod, the kind that passes between men when they recognize good fortune. But there were moments, small fractures in the perfect picture, that I'd learned to ignore. The way Marcus would sometimes check his phone during dinner, his expression flickering with something I couldn't quite name before he'd smile and tuck it away. How he'd occasionally mention Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend from college, with a wistfulness that felt too tender for someone who was supposed to be in the past. Once, about 6 months into our relationship, I'd asked him directly if he still had feelings for her. We were lying in bed, the Sunday morning light filtering through my curtains, and he'd turned to me with such earnest eyes and said that what he felt for me was deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. That I was his future. I'd believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative was too frightening to consider. The proposal came on a snowy evening in December, right in front of Rockefeller Center's Christmas tree. Marcus had gotten down on one knee despite the cold, despite the crowds of tourists with their cameras, and when he opened that small velvet box, the diamond caught the light from 1,000 twinkling bulbs above us. I said yes before he'd even finished asking, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air, and strangers around us had applauded. It felt like a fairy tale. It felt like everything I was supposed to want. Planning the wedding had consumed the next 8 months of my life. My best friend Rebecca had been by my side through every decision, from choosing between peonies and garden roses to taste testing 7 different flavors of cake. She was the one who held my hand when I had panic attacks about seating charts, who talked me down from returning the dress when I convinced myself it made me look like a giant cupcake, who reminded me that marriage was about the partnership, not the party. Rebecca had been skeptical about Marcus from the beginning, though she'd tried to hide it. I'd caught her watching him sometimes at group dinners, her artist's eye always seeing things others missed. When I'd confronted her about it once, she'd simply said that she wanted to make sure he loved me as much as I deserved to be loved. I'd laughed it off, but the comment had lodged itself somewhere deep in my chest. The wedding day itself had started with such promise. The venue was a restored barn upstate, all exposed wooden beams and strings of Edison bulbs, exactly the rustic, elegant aesthetic we'd spent months perfecting. The weather had cooperated, giving us a crisp October afternoon with leaves in shades of amber and crimson, creating a natural cathedral around the property. My bridesmaids, Rebecca included, looked stunning in their dusty rose dresses, and my father had held my arm with such pride as we practiced our walk down the aisle during the morning rehearsal. I'd seen Marcus for the first time that day during our planned first look, a private moment before the ceremony where the photographer would capture his reaction to seeing me in my dress. He'd been standing with his back to me in a secluded garden area, his hands clasped behind him, and when he turned around, I watched his face transform. He'd covered his mouth with his hand, and tears had actually formed in his eyes. He'd walked toward me slowly, reverently, and taken both my hands in his. Marcus had said, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I can't believe you're going to be my wife." I'd felt my own tears threatening to ruin my carefully applied makeup, and I'd whispered back, "I can't believe I get to spend my life with you." He'd kissed me then, gentle and sweet, and the photographer had captured it all. In that moment, standing in that garden with the man I loved, every doubt I'd ever had seemed ridiculous. This was real. This was right. This was my future unfolding exactly as it should. The ceremony had been perfect, almost eerily so. The officiant, a friend of Marcus's family, had spoken about love as a choice renewed daily, about partnership through storms and sunshine, about building a life together brick by brick. I'd repeated my vows with a steady voice, promising to honor and cherish, to be faithful and true. Marcus had stumbled slightly over his words, emotion catching in his throat, and it had made the moment feel even more genuine. When we were pronounced husband and wife, and he'd lifted my veil to kiss me, I'd heard my mother sobbing in the front row, and Rebecca had been wiping her eyes despite herself. The reception had been a blur of congratulations and champagne toasts. My father had given a speech about watching his little girl grow into a remarkable woman, about trusting Marcus to take care of his precious daughter. Marcus's best man, his college roommate Daniel, had told embarrassing stories that made everyone laugh, careful to keep them appropriate for the mixed company. Rebecca had raised her glass and said simply that she hoped Marcus knew how lucky he was, and that she expected him to prove himself worthy every single day. There'd been an edge to her words that I'd caught but chose to ignore, not wanting anything to mar the perfection of the evening. And then came our first dance. The DJ had queued up our song, a classic that Marcus had chosen because he said it reminded him of the first time he knew he loved me. The lights had dimmed, and a spotlight found us in the center of the dance floor. I'd felt the weight of 200 eyes on us as Marcus took my hand and placed his other hand on my waist. We'd taken lessons for this, determined not to be the couple that just swayed awkwardly, and as we began to move, I felt proud of how graceful we looked together. We were halfway through the song, spinning in slow circles, when Marcus pulled me closer and bent his head so his lips were next to my ear. His breath was warm against my skin, and for a second, I thought he was going to tell me he loved me, or that I looked beautiful, or any of the sweet things grooms say to their brides during first dances. Instead, Marcus whispered, "She's here tonight." I invited her. The words didn't register at first. The music kept playing, violins swelling around us, and we kept moving because muscle memory took over when my brain couldn't process what I'd just heard. I pulled back slightly to look at his face, searching for some indication that I'd misunderstood, that the champagne and emotion had garbled his words into something nonsensical. I asked, "What did you just say?" His eyes, the same warm brown eyes that had looked at me with such love just hours earlier, now held something different. Guilt, maybe, or defiance, or some terrible combination of both. Marcus said more clearly this time, "Vanessa, I invited Vanessa to the wedding. She's here, watching us right now." The world tilted. The fairy lights above us blurred into streaks of gold. The faces of our guests, smiling and swaying to the music around us, became a nightmare carousel. I felt my knees threaten to give out, but Marcus's grip on my waist tightened, holding me upright, forcing me to continue this obscene choreography. We were still dancing, still playing the role of blissful newlyweds while my entire reality crumbled. I managed to force words through my constricted throat. "You invited your ex-girlfriend to our wedding?" He had the audacity to look pained, like I was being unreasonable by reacting poorly to this information. I know how it sounds, but I needed her to see. I needed her to know that I'd moved on, that I'd found someone else, that I was happy. "You needed her to see you marry someone else?" The music swelled around us, completely at odds with the conversation we were having. "What is wrong with you?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Don't make a scene. Everyone's watching us. We can talk about this later, but right now we need to finish this dance and get through the rest of the reception." "Make a scene?" I could hear my voice rising despite myself. "You just told me you invited your ex-girlfriend to watch us get married, and you're worried about me making a scene." A few couples near us had stopped their own swaying, sensing that something was wrong. Rebecca, who'd been dancing with one of Marcus's groomsmen, had turned her head sharply in our direction, her expression immediately alert. I saw her start to move toward us, but the song was ending, the final notes fading into scattered applause. Marcus released me and stepped back, clapping along with everyone else, his face transformed back into the mask of a happy groom. He leaned in one more time, his smile never wavering for the cameras that were certainly capturing this moment. Table 17. She's at table 17 in the back. Dark green dress. Don't do anything stupid. Then he was being pulled away by his groomsmen for photos, and I was left standing alone in the middle of the dance floor, my wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume, my new rings burning on my finger like brands. Rebecca materialized at my side instantly, her hand finding mine. Rebecca asked, "What the hell just happened? You look like you're going to be sick." I couldn't speak. I could only turn my head toward the back of the reception space, scanning the tables until I found number 17. And there she was, Vanessa. I'd seen pictures, of course, during those early days of dating Marcus when I'd done the obligatory social media stalking that all new girlfriends do. But seeing her in person was different. She was striking in a way that photographs hadn't quite captured, with long dark hair that fell in waves over her shoulders and a face that belonged in a museum. The green dress she wore was elegant and understated, appropriate for a wedding guest, which somehow made it worse. She wasn't trying to upstage the bride. She was just there, existing, watching. A ghost made flesh at my wedding reception. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and she didn't look away. Didn't have the decency to look embarrassed or apologetic. She simply raised her champagne glass in a small salute, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, and took a sip. Rebecca followed my gaze and immediately sucked in a sharp breath. "Is that who I think it is? Please tell me that's not Vanessa. Marcus invited her?" The words came out flat, emotionless. "He just told me during our first dance. He invited his ex-girlfriend to our wedding." I watched Rebecca's face cycle through shock, fury, and then a cold determination I'd seen before when someone crossed a line with her. She started to move toward Marcus, who was posing with his groomsmen near the bar, but I grabbed her arm. "Don't, not yet. I need to think." "Think?" Rebecca's voice was sharp. "Thinking time is over. You need to throw him out of this reception, get this marriage annulled, and sue him for every cent you spent on this ridiculous party." But I couldn't move. Couldn't think beyond the roaring in my ears and the sick feeling spreading through my stomach. The DJ was announcing that dinner would be served shortly, encouraging guests to find their seats. My mother appeared out of nowhere, beaming, asking if everything was all right because I looked pale. I heard myself saying I was fine, just overwhelmed, just emotional, just a bride on her wedding day feeling all the feelings. She hugged me and told me to drink some water, that it was a lot to process, becoming a wife. Becoming a wife. To a man who had invited another woman, the woman he'd apparently never gotten over, to witness our marriage. The dinner service passed in a haze. I sat at the head table, Marcus to my right, smiling and nodding as people came up to congratulate us. He held my hand above the table, playing the devoted husband, but underneath, where no one could see, his grip was tight enough to hurt. Every time I tried to pull away, he'd squeeze harder, a silent warning. Between courses, I'd sneak glances at table 17, watching Vanessa chat with the other guests seated there, most of whom were distant relatives of Marcus who probably had no idea who she really was. During the salad course, I finally found my voice. Without looking at Marcus, I said quietly, "Why?" He kept his smile fixed for the guests milling around us, but his words were clipped. "Because I spent 5 years trying to get over her, and I needed closure. I needed her to see what she gave up." "So you married me to make your ex-girlfriend jealous?" The lettuce on my plate looked like it belonged to someone else's meal, someone else's life. That's what this was about? Of course not. His voice took on an edge of frustration. "I love you. I do. But she broke my heart, and she needed to see that I'd moved on, that I'd found happiness without her." Found happiness or created a performance? I finally turned to look at him, this stranger in a tuxedo who I'd just legally bound myself to. "What happens after tonight, Marcus? After she's seen your little show?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Then we go on our honeymoon. We start our life together. This doesn't have to change anything." Doesn't have to change anything? I let out a laugh that sounded unhinged even to my own ears. A few heads turned our way, and I forced it down. "You built our entire relationship, our engagement, Our wedding on a foundation of trying to prove something to another woman, and you think that doesn't change anything? Before he could respond, the best man was standing, tapping his glass, beginning his speech. I had to sit there, listening to Daniel talk about Marcus's loyalty and integrity, about how he'd never seen his friend happier than when he was with me, about how we were clearly soulmates. Every word was acid. Every smile I forced felt like it was cracking my face. Rebecca, seated at the bridesmaids' table, was staring daggers at Marcus, and I could see her texting furiously under the table, probably to her girlfriend Melissa, who was also at the wedding. After dinner came the cake cutting, another choreographed moment for the cameras. Marcus fed me a piece with exaggerated gentleness, and when I was supposed to feed him, I seriously considered shoving it directly into his face. But I didn't. I played along because I didn't know what else to do, because 200 people were watching, because my parents had spent their retirement savings helping to pay for this event, because the alternative was to admit that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life in front of everyone I knew. The dancing resumed after cake. Marcus was pulled away by his mother for their mother-son dance, and I was temporarily alone at our table. That's when Vanessa made her move. I saw her stand up from table 17, smoothing her green dress, and begin walking toward me with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. My heart started hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribcage. She reached the head table and stood there for a moment, just looking at me with those dark, assessing eyes. Up close, she was even more beautiful, with the kind of bone structure that ages gracefully and skin that seemed to glow from within. I hated her instantly and completely. Vanessa said, "Congratulations on your marriage." Her voice was cultured, smooth, with just a hint of something that might have been amusement. I stared at her, unable to formulate words. What was the appropriate response when your husband's ex-girlfriend, whom he'd secretly invited to your wedding, approached to offer congratulations? I finally managed, "You shouldn't be here." "I know." She pulled out the chair next to me, Marcus's empty chair, and sat down with the casual ease of someone settling in for a chat. "But he begged me to come. Did he tell you that? He called me 2 months ago, saying he needed me to be here, that it was important. 2 months ago." The timeline made me nauseous. That was right after we'd sent out the invitations. While I'd been addressing envelopes and organizing seating charts, he'd been begging his ex to attend. What did he say exactly? Vanessa tilted her head, studying me with what looked like genuine curiosity. He said he was getting married to a wonderful woman, and he wanted me to see how happy he was. He said it would help him finally close that chapter of his life. I almost didn't come because it seemed cruel, but then I thought maybe he was right. Maybe seeing him married would help me close that chapter too. "So you're not over him either?" It wasn't a question. "Oh, I'm completely over him." Her smile was sharp. "I broke up with Marcus 7 years ago because he was too needy, too possessive, too desperate for validation. I've been happily married to someone else for 3 years now. My husband is at home with our 6-month-old daughter because I told him I had to attend a friend's wedding. I didn't tell him it was my ex's wedding because that would have required explaining why I was stupid enough to agree to come. I absorbed this information, trying to make sense of it. "So you're married with a child?" "Very much so, and very happy, which is why this whole situation is so absurd." She leaned back in the chair, crossing her legs. Marcus painted this picture of me as the one who got away, the great lost love of his life. But the truth is, I got away because he was exhausting. He wanted me to be his entire world, his validation, his purpose. When I told him I needed space to figure out my own life, to pursue my career, to be something other than his girlfriend, he fell apart. Made me feel guilty for wanting my own identity. So I left. And he never got over it. The pieces were starting to fit together in a horrible mosaic. Apparently not, though I have to say, marrying someone else to prove you've moved on is a new level of dysfunction, even for Marcus. She paused, her expression softening slightly. "For what it's worth, you seem lovely, and you deserve better than being a prop in his revenge fantasy." Rebecca appeared then, her face flushed with anger, with Melissa right behind her. "Get away from her," Rebecca practically snarled at Vanessa. "You have some nerve coming over here." Vanessa stood gracefully, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. "I was just leaving, and for the record, I'm going to walk out of here and never look back. I shouldn't have come in the first place. My advice would be to do the same. but I suppose you have a few more legal hoops to jump through first." She walked away, heading toward the exit, and I watched her go with a mixture of fury and bizarre gratitude. At least she'd been honest. At least she'd told me the truth that Marcus had been hiding. Rebecca slid into the chair Vanessa had vacated. "Please tell me you're not going through with this marriage. Please tell me you're going to get this annulled. I don't know what I'm doing." My hands were shaking. I clasped them together in my lap, trying to still them. "I don't know anything anymore. You know he's a manipulative jerk who just used you to play out some sick game with his ex." Melissa, always more blunt than Rebecca, crouched down beside my chair. "You know you deserve better than this." The reception continued around us. People were dancing, laughing, celebrating a union that already felt like a lie. My father was telling stories to some of Marcus's relatives, probably about me as a child, building up this image of his daughter finding her happily ever after. My mother was organizing the bouquet toss, gathering all the single women. Everything was proceeding according to plan, according to the timeline we'd carefully crafted, while my world disintegrated. Marcus returned from his mother-son dance, his eyes immediately finding me and registering Rebecca and Melissa's protective positions around my chair. He approached cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded animal. Marcus said, "Can we talk? Privately?" "Absolutely not," Rebecca answered for me. "You don't get to isolate her right now. This is between me and my wife." The way he said the word wife was possessive, proprietary. It made my skin crawl. I stood up, my legs steadier than I expected. "Fine, we can talk, but not here, not in front of everyone." We walked out of the reception hall, past the guests who were too caught up in their own enjoyment to notice the bride and groom leaving. We ended up in a small room off the main space, a bridal suite where I'd gotten ready earlier that day. My makeup supplies were still scattered across the vanity, relics from a time when my biggest worry was whether my lipstick would last through dinner. As soon as the door closed, Marcus started talking, the words pouring out in a rush. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but you have to understand where I was coming from. Vanessa destroyed me when she left. She made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I'd never be enough, and I've spent years trying to prove to myself that I could be happy without her, that I could find someone even better." "Someone even better?" I repeated his words back to him, tasting their bitterness. "So what am I, Marcus? An upgrade? A consolation prize? A tool for your emotional healing? You're my wife. The woman I chose to spend my life with. You chose me to make Vanessa jealous." The clarity was sharp and painful. "You chose me because I was available and willing and probably naive enough to not see through you." He reached for my hands, but I pulled away. His face crumpled with what looked like genuine distress, but I couldn't trust my read on him anymore. How could I trust anything about a man who'd orchestrated this elaborate deception? Marcus insisted, "I do love you. That part is real. Maybe it started for the wrong reasons, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. With your kindness and your humor and the way you see the best in people. The way I saw the best in you, you mean? The way I believed every word you said, every promise you made. I could feel tears threatening, hot and furious behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not for him. You proposed to me in front of Rockefeller Center. Was that real, or was that part of the performance too?" "It was real. All of it was real. Except for the part where you were still hung up on your ex. Except for the part where you invited her to our wedding. Except for all the lies." I turned away from him, unable to look at his face anymore. "I don't even know who you are. I'm the same person I've always been. You're just seeing parts of me I kept hidden because I knew you'd react like this." The audacity of that statement made me spin back around. React like what? Like a woman who just discovered her husband has been using her? Like someone who realized her entire relationship is built on deception? How exactly should I react, Marcus? He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he struggled to find words. Finally, he said, "I don't know. I just know I don't want to lose you. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out." "Figure out what? How to build a real marriage on a foundation of lies?" I shook my head, feeling exhausted suddenly, like all the energy had drained out of my body at once. "I need you to leave me alone right now. I need to think. We're supposed to cut out of here in an hour for the hotel. We have a flight to Bali tomorrow for our honeymoon. I'm not going to Bali with you." the decision formed as I spoke it. I'm not going anywhere with you right now. Panic flashed across his face. What are you saying? I'm saying I need space. I'm saying I need time to figure out what I want to do with this marriage that's approximately 4 hours old and already falling apart. You're being dramatic. People have problems, couples work through them. Do you hear yourself? I was incredulous. You think this is just a normal couple problem? You invited your ex-girlfriend to our wedding to make her jealous, and you think that's something we can just work through? Someone knocked on the door then, soft but insistent. Rebecca's voice came through. Everything okay in there? Your mom is looking for you. They want to do the bouquet toss. The bouquet toss. Another ritual, another performance. The single women gathered in a cluster, competing to catch the promise of future love, while the bride who'd just caught her own bouquet stood in a side room realizing her love was rotten from the start. I opened the door. Rebecca took one look at my face and immediately pulled me into a hug. Over her shoulder, I could see Melissa standing guard in the hallway. And beyond her, through the open doors of the reception hall, I could see my wedding continuing without me. The party I'd spent months planning, the celebration of a union I was no longer sure I wanted. Rebecca whispered in my ear, "Tell me what you need. I need to get out of here. I need to go home. I need this day to be over." Then that's what we'll do. Let me handle your parents. Let me handle the guests. You just get changed and let's go. But it wasn't that simple. I was the bride. I couldn't just leave my own wedding reception. Could I? The voices in my head were at war. The part of me that had been raised to be polite and accommodating said I had to stay, had to finish what I'd started, had to maintain appearances. But there was another voice, quieter but growing stronger, that said I didn't owe anyone a performance. Not anymore. I made a decision. I walked back into the reception hall, still in my wedding dress, and went straight to my parents. They were seated with some of their friends, wine glasses in hand, faces flushed with happiness and alcohol. My father saw me first and his smile faltered when he registered my expression. My father asked, "Sweetheart, what's wrong? I need to tell you something and I need you not to make a scene." I pulled up a chair, sitting between my parents, aware that people were watching us. Marcus invited his ex-girlfriend to the wedding. She's been here all night. He told me during our first dance. I watched my mother's face drain of color. My father's expression went from confusion to fury in the span of a heartbeat. He started to stand, looking around for Marcus, but I grabbed his arm. "Please, Dad. Not here. Not now. I just need your support right now. I need to leave, and I need you to help me leave without this turning into more of a disaster than it already is." My mother found her voice. "Leave? You can't leave your own wedding reception. I can't stay here pretending everything is fine when my husband just told me he married me to make another woman jealous. I can't do it, Mom. I'm sorry for the money you spent. I'm sorry for the embarrassment, but I cannot stay here." My father was still staring at me, processing this information. Then slowly, he nodded. Okay. Let me think. He was a problem solver by nature, an engineer who'd spent his career finding solutions to complex issues. "We'll say you're not feeling well. Bride got overwhelmed, needs to rest before the honeymoon. Rebecca can help you change. We'll have your mother make the rounds. Tell everyone you're fine but exhausted. We'll wind this down early." "What about Marcus?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about him?" My father's tone was cold. "He can stay here and face the guests himself if he wants. Or he can leave. I don't particularly care what he does as long as he stays away from my daughter right now." Hearing my father, who'd walked me down the aisle just hours earlier, talk about Marcus with such contempt was both heartbreaking and validating. Rebecca appeared with Melissa, and together they escorted me back to the bridal suite. They helped me out of my dress, careful with each button, and into the jeans and sweater I'd planned to change into for the getaway. The wedding dress hung on the back of the door, a beautiful ghost of the day's hopes. Melissa said, "I'm going to get your stuff from the hotel. You're staying with us tonight. No arguments." I nodded, too numb to protest. Rebecca was gathering my belongings, shoving makeup and jewelry into bags with efficient fury. Through the closed door, I could hear the music stop, hear my mother's voice over the microphone making some excuse about the bride needing to rest, thanking everyone for coming. There was a murmur of concerned voices, confused guests trying to understand why the reception was ending early. Then there was pounding on the door. Marcus's voice, tight with panic. "Let me in. I need to talk to her." Rebecca positioned herself between me and the door. "She doesn't want to talk to you right now. She's my wife. I have a right to talk to my wife." "Your wife who you've been lying to for the entire duration of your relationship?" Rebecca shot back. "The wife you used to play out some pathetic revenge fantasy? That wife?" "This is none of your business, Rebecca. This is between me and her." I found my voice. "She's right, Marcus. I don't want to talk to you. I want you to leave me alone. We're supposed to leave for our honeymoon tomorrow. We have plans. We have reservations. Cancel them. I'm not going anywhere with you. You're overreacting. You're letting your friends poison you against me. If we could just talk, just the two of us, I could make you understand." My father's voice cut through, sharp and authoritative. "Son, I suggest you step away from that door right now. Mr. Harrison, this is between me and your daughter. Your daughter stopped being just my daughter when you married her under false pretenses. Right now, she's a young woman who's been hurt and humiliated, and I'm her father who's about to remove you from this venue if you don't walk away voluntarily." There was silence, then the sound of footsteps retreating. Rebecca cracked open the door to make sure he was gone, then gave me the all clear. We left through a back entrance, avoiding the main reception hall where guests were slowly filtering out, confused about the abrupt ending but too polite to ask direct questions. Melissa had my car waiting. Rebecca and I climbed into the back seat while Melissa drove, and as we pulled away from the venue, I finally let myself look back. Through the windows, I could see the Edison bulbs still twinkling, the decorations I'd chosen with such care, the remnants of a celebration for a marriage that had imploded before it even began. The tears came then, silent and steady. Rebecca held me while I cried, not saying anything, just being there. Melissa turned on the radio to fill the silence, some pop song about being stronger alone. It felt almost comically on the nose, but I was too tired to laugh. We arrived at Rebecca and Melissa's apartment, a cozy two-bedroom in Brooklyn that had always felt like a sanctuary to me. They'd moved in together a year earlier, and their space was filled with Melissa's photographs and Rebecca's paintings, a creative haven that stood in stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the condo Marcus and I had rented together. Melissa made tea while Rebecca helped me wash my face, removing the elaborate makeup that had taken an hour to apply that morning. In the bathroom mirror, I looked like a stranger. Or maybe I looked like myself for the first time in a long time. Without the makeup, without the styling, without the costume of the perfect bride, I was just me. 31 years old, married for less than a day, and completely lost. We sat in their living room, me wrapped in a blanket on their couch, nursing the tea Melissa had made. The apartment was quiet except for the sounds of the city filtering in through the windows. Car horns, distant sirens, the ordinary sounds of life continuing while mine had derailed completely. Rebecca finally broke the silence. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something earlier. I knew something was off about him, but I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to be the friend who ruined your happiness based on a gut feeling. This isn't your fault. This is all Marcus, all his choices, his lies, his manipulation." I stared into my tea, watching the steam rise. I just keep thinking about all the signs I ignored. All the times he mentioned Vanessa. All the times he checked his phone and seemed distant. I chose not to see it because I wanted the fairy tale. Melissa, ever practical, asked, "So what are you going to do now?" "I don't know. Get the marriage annulled, I guess. Is that even possible after consummation?" The clinical term made me laugh bitterly. Not that we'll be consummating anything at this point. Talk to a lawyer first thing Monday morning. Document everything. Get your ducks in a row. Melissa had gone through a nasty divorce 3 years earlier and spoke from hard-won experience. Don't let him talk you into couples counseling or working through this. Don't let him manipulate you into thinking you're overreacting. I already know I'm not overreacting. That much was clear. But I keep wondering if I'm partially to blame. If I missed something obvious, if I was too desperate to get married, too eager to check off the boxes of what I thought my life should look like. Rebecca shook her head firmly. Don't do that to yourself. Don't make his deception your fault. You trusted someone you thought you could trust. That's not a failing. That's being human. My phone had been buzzing constantly in my purse. I finally pulled it out and saw dozens of messages. From Marcus mostly, ranging from apologetic to angry to desperate. From his mother, expressing concern and confusion, from various relatives and friends who'd attended the wedding, asking if I was okay, and one from Vanessa, which surprised me enough that I opened it. The message read, "I know this probably means nothing coming from me, but I'm genuinely sorry for the role I played in tonight's disaster. Marcus called me repeatedly for 2 months, and I should have told him to get therapy instead of agreeing to come. For what it's worth, you handled yourself with far more grace than the situation deserved. I hope you find someone who loves you for you, not as a supporting character in their drama. Take care of yourself." I showed the message to Rebecca and Melissa. Rebecca snorted. "At least she has the decency to acknowledge her part in this mess." She said she's married with a baby. I set the phone down, too exhausted to respond to any of the messages. Marcus has been pining after a woman who moved on years ago, building me up as some kind of replacement for a relationship that was never as significant as he made it out to be. The full weight of it crashed over me then. I hadn't just married someone who still had feelings for their ex. I'd married someone who had constructed an entire fantasy narrative where I was just a character designed to make his ex jealous, to prove his worth, to validate his wounded ego. Every moment of our relationship that I'd treasured, every sweet gesture and romantic surprise, had been tainted by the knowledge that it was all performed for an audience of one woman who didn't even care. I spent that night on Rebecca and Melissa's couch, wrapped in their spare blankets, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the past 3 years, looking for the clues I'd missed, wondering how I'd been so blind. The sunrise came too early, painting their living room in shades of pink and gold, and I realized I'd barely slept. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. On the 4th call, I finally answered. I said flatly, "What do you want?" His voice was rough, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept. "I want to talk to you. I want to explain. You explained last night. You invited your ex to our wedding to make her jealous. I think that covers it. It's more complicated than that. If you'd just let me tell you the whole story." "I don't want the whole story, Marcus. I want a divorce." The word hung in the air between us. I'd said it, made it real. Marcus's voice cracked. "Don't say that. Please don't say that. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll cut off all contact with Vanessa. I'll go to therapy. I'll prove to you that I love you. You can't prove something that isn't true. And even if you do love me in some twisted way, it's not enough. It's not the kind of love I deserve. What about the honeymoon? What about the apartment we rented together? What about all our plans? What about them? None of it was real, Marcus. It was all built on lies. You can have the apartment. You can cancel the honeymoon. I don't care what you do as long as it doesn't involve me. You're my wife." He was pleading now, desperate. "You can't just walk away from a marriage after one day. Watch me." I ended the call and immediately blocked his number. Rebecca emerged from her bedroom, bleary-eyed and concerned. "Was that him?" "Yeah, I told him I want a divorce." She sat down next to me on the couch. "How do you feel?" "Numb, angry, relieved, all of it at once." I pulled the blanket tighter around myself. "Is it crazy that I feel guilty? Like I'm giving up too easily?" "It's not crazy, but it is the manipulation working. He's conditioned you to doubt yourself, to prioritize his feelings over your own instincts. That's what emotional manipulators do." Melissa appeared with coffee and bagels, basic sustenance for a crisis. "First priority today is finding you a lawyer. Second priority is getting your stuff out of the apartment you shared with him. Third priority is taking care of yourself." We spent the morning making phone calls. My mother called, devastated and supportive in equal measure. My father called, asking if I needed him to have a conversation with Marcus, his tone suggesting the conversation might not be entirely verbal. Friends from the wedding called, fishing for information, and I kept my responses brief and vague. By Monday afternoon, I had a consultation scheduled with a divorce attorney Rebecca's cousin had recommended. By Tuesday, I'd moved my belongings out of the apartment Marcus and I had shared, with Rebecca, Melissa, and my father helping me pack while Marcus was at work. I left my engagement ring and wedding band on the kitchen counter with a note that said simply, "I deserve better than this." The legal process of dissolving a marriage was tedious and painful. Marcus contested the divorce at first, insisting we try counseling, but I held firm. My lawyer was a sharp woman in her 50s named Margaret, who'd seen every manipulation tactic in the book and coached me through each one. Margaret told me during one of our meetings, men like Marcus often genuinely believe they love you, but their love is conditional on you fulfilling a specific role in their narrative. Once you step outside that role, once you demand to be seen as a full person with your own needs and boundaries, that love evaporates pretty quickly. She was right. As I refused to engage with Marcus's attempts at reconciliation, as I maintained my boundaries and moved forward with the divorce, his messages shifted from apologetic to angry. He accused me of giving up on us, of not fighting for our marriage, of being influenced by Rebecca, who he'd apparently always thought was a bad influence. The more he showed me of his true self, the more relieved I was that I'd escaped when I did. The divorce was finalized 6 months after our wedding day. 6 months of legal wrangling, of dividing assets we'd barely had time to accumulate, of explaining to everyone from distant relatives to co-workers why my marriage had lasted approximately 4 hours. 6 months of therapy, where I unpacked not just the Marcus situation, but the patterns in my life that had made me vulnerable to his manipulation in the first place. My therapist, Dr. Chen, was particularly helpful in identifying how I'd ignored my own instincts in favor of the narrative I thought my life should follow. How I'd been so focused on checking boxes, getting married by a certain age, building a certain kind of life, that I'd overlooked fundamental incompatibilities and red flags. Dr. Chen asked during one session, "What would you tell a friend who came to you with this situation? If Rebecca told you her fiancé had invited his ex to their wedding without her knowledge, what would you say?" "I'd tell her to run, to get as far away as possible." "So why was it so hard to extend that same kindness and wisdom to yourself?" That question haunted me for weeks. Why had I been willing to accept treatment from Marcus that I'd never tolerate for a friend? Why had I minimized my own pain, made excuses for his behavior, convinced myself I was overreacting? The answer came slowly, through therapy and reflection and long conversations with Rebecca and my parents. I'd been taught, in 1,000 subtle ways, that being a good woman meant being accommodating, meant not making waves, meant smoothing over conflict and giving people the benefit of the doubt, meant valuing relationships above my own well-being. My mother came to visit me one afternoon, about 8 months after the wedding that wasn't. We sat in the small studio apartment I'd rented in Queens, drinking tea and watching the sun set over the city. She'd been quiet about the whole situation, processing her own disappointment about how things had turned out. Finally, she said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For putting pressure on you to get married. For talking about grandchildren and making comments about your biological clock. For making you feel like being married was an achievement and being single was a failure." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I grew up in a different time, when a woman's value was measured by her ability to find a husband. I thought I'd raised you differently, but I still passed on those messages in subtle ways. Mom, this isn't your fault. Marcus lied to me. That's on him, not you. But I created an environment where you felt rushed to find someone. Anyone, rather than waiting for the right person. I made you feel like 30 was old, like you were running out of time." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so proud of you for leaving. For choosing yourself. For being brave enough to walk away from a situation that wasn't healthy, even when it was embarrassing and difficult." Those words, that validation from my mother, cracked something open in me. I cried then, really cried, in a way I hadn't since the wedding night. Cried for the future I'd imagined that wouldn't happen. Cried for the trust I'd given to someone who didn't deserve it. Cried for the part of myself I'd betrayed by ignoring my instincts. But also cried in relief. Relief that I'd gotten out. Relief that I'd found the strength to choose myself. The year after the divorce was hard, but transformative. I threw myself into my career, taking on projects I'd previously been too cautious to attempt. I got a promotion at work, partially because I was channeling all my energy into something I could control, something where my efforts produced measurable results. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned in college, and found it therapeutic to create something just for myself, with no audience, no judgment, no purpose beyond expression. Rebecca and Melissa got engaged themselves, a beautiful proposal that involved a scavenger hunt through Brooklyn, ending at the spot where they'd had their first date. Watching them together, Seeing the easy intimacy and genuine partnership they shared showed me what I'd been missing with Marcus. They challenged each other, supported each other, but fundamentally trusted each other. There were no games, no manipulations, no secret agendas. I went on a few dates, cautiously dipping my toes back into the world of romantic possibilities. Some were fine, some were terrible. None of them were serious because I wasn't ready for serious. I was still learning how to trust myself again, how to listen to my instincts instead of overriding them in favor of what I thought I should want. One evening, about 14 months after the wedding, I ran into Marcus. It was completely accidental, both of us reaching for the same book in a bookstore in Manhattan. Our hands touched the spine at the same moment, and we both jerked back in recognition. He looked different, older somehow, though it hadn't been that long. There were lines around his eyes that I didn't remember, and he'd grown a beard that didn't quite suit him. Marcus said, "Hi." "Hi." I stepped back, creating distance between us. My heart was pounding, but not with longing. With the remnants of hurt and the echo of anger. "How have you been?" "Good. Really good, actually." And I meant it. "You?" "I've been okay. In therapy. Working on myself." He shifted his weight awkwardly. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the ones I tried to give you when I was just trying to save the marriage." I waited, curious despite myself. Marcus continued. "You were right about everything. I did use you to try to make Vanessa jealous. I did manipulate you. I convinced myself I loved you, and maybe I did in some way. But it wasn't healthy love. It wasn't the kind of love you deserved. My therapist has helped me see how toxic my patterns have been, how I've been chasing validation from the wrong sources. I appreciate you saying that. And I did, though it didn't change anything. I hope you figure it out. I hope you become someone capable of real partnership someday. You've really moved on." It wasn't a question. He could see it in my face, in my posture, in the way I was already starting to edge toward the exit. "I have, completely. I picked up a different book, one I'd actually been looking for. I hope you can too. I hope you can let go of whatever you've been holding on to and find real happiness." We said goodbye then, politely and finally. As I walked out of the bookstore, I realized I felt nothing for him. Not love, not hate, not even real anger anymore. He was just someone I used to know. Someone who'd taught me hard lessons about trust and self-worth and the importance of listening to your own voice. 2 years after the wedding, I met Jonathan. We were both volunteers at a community garden in Brooklyn, and our first conversation was about proper tomato staking techniques. He was kind and funny and completely different from Marcus, a high school teacher who spent his summers traveling to teach English in other countries. Someone who listened more than he talked. Someone whose ex-girlfriends were just that, exes, without drama or lingering obsessions. We took it slow. I was honest with him from the beginning about my history, about my hesitations, about my need to build trust gradually. He was patient. He let me set the pace. When I met his family, they were warm, but not overwhelming. When I talked about my career ambitions, he asked thoughtful questions and supported my goals without trying to redirect them around his own needs. One evening, about 8 months into our relationship, we were cooking dinner together in his apartment, and he was telling me about one of his students who'd written a particularly insightful essay about personal growth. I was chopping vegetables, half listening, content in the comfortable domesticity of the moment. And it hit me, this sense of rightness. This feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly who I was supposed to be with. I stopped chopping and turned to look at him. Jonathan noticed immediately, always attuned to shifts in mood. He asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just realized I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. And it feels so different from what I thought happiness was supposed to feel like." He smiled, understanding without needing extensive explanation. "Different how?" "It's quieter, more solid. There's no anxiety underneath it, no feeling like I have to perform or prove something. It just is." I set down the knife and moved closer to him. With Marcus, I was always trying to earn his love, to be worthy of it. I didn't even realize I was doing it until it was over. But with you, I just feel loved. Not because I'm perfect, not because I'm playing a role, just because I'm me. Jonathan pulled me into a hug, resting his chin on top of my head. That's all I want, for you to be yourself, the real, messy, complicated, brilliant you. We got married 3 years later, in a small ceremony at that same community garden where we'd met. Rebecca and Melissa were there, along with my parents and Jonathan's family and a small group of close friends. No hundreds of guests, no elaborate productions. Just the people we loved most, bearing witness to a commitment that felt real and chosen and right. This time, there were no whispered revelations during our first dance. No uninvited exes lurking at table 17. No secret agendas or manipulations. Just two people who'd found each other after learning hard lessons about what love should and shouldn't be, choosing to build a life together on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The reception was held in the garden itself, with string lights overhead and potluck dishes contributed by guests. My father gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about second chances and the wisdom that comes from surviving heartbreak. Rebecca spoke about watching me transform from someone who'd lost herself to someone who'd found herself more fully than ever before. As Jonathan and I danced, I thought about that other wedding, that other first dance, that moment when my world had shattered. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything. Like my life was ruined, my future destroyed, my chance at happiness squandered. But standing there in the garden, in Jonathan's arms, surrounded by people who genuinely loved us both, I understood that it hadn't been an ending at all. It had been a beginning. The beginning of learning who I really was, what I really needed, what I was and wasn't willing to accept in the name of love. That disastrous wedding day, as painful as it was, had been a gift. It had shown me the truth before I'd wasted years in a false marriage. It had forced me to confront patterns and beliefs that were holding me back. It had pushed me to value my own instincts and needs above the fear of being alone or the pressure to conform to timelines and expectations. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to becoming who we were always meant to be. Sometimes what feels like failure is actually the universe course-correcting, pushing us towards something better than we'd imagined for ourselves. I wouldn't recommend my path to anyone. The humiliation, the heartbreak, the legal complications, the explanations to confused relatives, none of it was pleasant. But I also wouldn't change it, because that journey, painful as it was, led me here, to this garden, to this man, to this version of myself who knows her own worth and refuses to settle for less than she deserves. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing with Rebecca, looking up at the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Rebecca said, "Remember when you called me from the bridal suite, completely falling apart, convinced your life was over? How could I forget? I thought I'd never recover from that humiliation. Look at you now, married to someone who actually deserves you, thriving in your career, more yourself than I've ever seen you." She squeezed my hand. "I'm so proud of you. For having the courage to walk away. For doing the work to heal. For being willing to try again. I'm proud of me too." It felt strange to say it out loud, but it was true. I survived something I thought would destroy me, and I came out stronger on the other side. Jonathan appeared then, slipping his arm around my waist, fitting perfectly against my side. "Ready to head out? Our chariot awaits." We'd rented a vintage car to drive us to a bed and breakfast upstate, nothing fancy, just a quiet place to start our married life together. As we waved goodbye to our guests and climbed into the car, I took one last look at the garden where we'd planted our love, quite literally, in soil and sunlight and patient tending. The road ahead was dark, illuminated only by our headlights, but I wasn't afraid. I knew now that I could trust myself to navigate whatever came next. That I could recognize red flags and honor my instincts. That I was strong enough to walk away from situations that diminished me and brave enough to stay present in relationships that nurtured growth. Marcus had taught me what love wasn't. Jonathan was teaching me what love could be. And I'd taught myself the most important lesson of all, that the relationship with yourself is the foundation for every other relationship in your life. That you can't build lasting happiness on a foundation of self-betrayal and ignored instincts. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away, even when it's hard, even when it's embarrassing, even when everyone is watching. The wedding that had ended in disaster had ultimately led me to this wedding, this partnership, this life. And for that unexpected journey, With all its pain and lessons and eventual joy, I found myself feeling something surprising. Gratitude. Not gratitude for Marcus or what he'd put me through, but gratitude for my own resilience. For the friends who'd supported me, for the family who'd stood by me, for the strength I'd discovered within myself when I needed it most. As we drove through the night toward our new beginning, I realized that my story wasn't about a failed wedding or a toxic marriage, or even about finding love again. It was about finding myself, about learning to trust my own voice, about refusing to accept less than I deserved, even when that refusal came at a cost. And that story, my story, was still being written, not by anyone else's expectations or timelines or narratives, but by me. One honest choice at a time. One boundary held at a time. One moment of self-honoring at a time. The worst day of my life had become the catalyst for the best version of myself. And if I could survive that, if I could transform that pain into wisdom and strength, then I could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. The road stretched out before us, full of possibilities. And this time, I was ready for whatever came next.